That's pretty good that I'm on.
Oh, thank you.
I always get self.
Oh, you're on it. You're on.
I can turn that off now until we're absolutely ready.
Center of Sustainable Food Systems at the UBC Farm. It is my pleasure to welcome Douglas Gayeton, who is going to be our speaker today. He is a taxonomist, filmmaker, photographer, and writer who's created award-winning work in boundaries of traditional and converging media since the early 90s. He's also created social networks and online communities, creatively overseeing groundbreaking digital work, and directed numerous projects for television. Douglas is the author of Slow, Life in a Tuscan Town, and the new book, Local, New Face of Food and Farming in America. His photographs are held in numerous museums and private collections around the world. Douglas grew up in Northern California and was a skateboarder in his youth. Glad to see you made that.
I'm still in my youth.
And, if you brought your board, you could go longboarding on the North Shore here.
Okay.
It's world famous. Father and farmer in his extended youth, and now living in a farm in
Petaluma.
Petaluma, California.
I want you to imagine that you're walking down the street where you live. It's a familiar street. And a stranger comes up to you. And he puts a hand in his pocket. And he tells you to close your eyes because he's going to put something in your mouth. That's your food system. We live in a world where our food system is completely opaque, which means we don't know who grows our food, we don't know what's in it, and we don't know how it reached our door. And that's a problem. It's a problem when you have an opaque food system because you don't have a food system ultimately that's based upon values. You have a food system that's based upon price. I wanted to know how our food system got that way. And when I talked to people, they gave me all kinds of ideas, and one of them was the idea of sustainability. Very touchy thing here. I met an American Indian named Running Squirrel, and I asked him what sustainability was. And Running Squirrel didn't know. But later that day, when he was showing me how he foraged, he told me that his grandmother and his great-grandmother had told him that the way that you find things in the wild to eat is that you watch the animals. And then you do what the animals do. You don't eat all of something. You leave a little bit behind, so when you come back the next year, there's going to be something there. Is that sustainability, he asked me. I meet a woman. It's probably not going to work out. I meet a woman who has farmed for 6 generations, and I asked her what sustainability is. And she looked at me for a long time, and she said, I don't know about sustainability, I know about survivability. Because it doesn't matter what values I have as a farmer, if I can't make it until the next season, it's not going to matter anyway. Sustainability is something that comes with challenges. I meet a young man in Washington State. He told me that he had learned about organic food. Thought it was really interesting. Told his mom he wanted to have some organic food. They went to the market and they couldn't afford it. So he said to himself, doesn't sound so hard, maybe I'll just grow it myself. He planted some food in his backyard. Turned out to be easier than he thought. The next year he planted 200 gardens in his community. for people just like him to explain what organic food was about. Peter Gayeton is down in New Orleans. He survived Katrina, and then he survived the BP oil spill. And as a crabber, he certainly would have a lot to say about what sustainability is. I wanted to tell their stories, but I never could figure out how to do it with the camera. I never could figure out how to get what they were saying and actually get it into a picture so I could give that picture to somebody else and tell Peter's story, or to tell Nancy Gleason's story, or to tell Running Squirrel's story, or to tell Miguel's story. And then I came up with an idea, and that is that I've always had this problem with photography, in that it's a moment in time that you catch. But sometimes things happen over a period of time, and sometimes things happen that are wider than the lens of a camera. So I thought, what would happen if I took a story and actually changed the way I looked at photography? So I took a guy named Will Allen. He raises fish in boxes inside in warehouses. This is in Milwaukee. And the waste from that water gets circulated up above, and he grows tomatoes. Then after that's filtered out, he runs it into this dirt bed here, and he raises worms, which he sells to farms. An entirely closed recirculating system that's all done in a bunch of boxes in a warehouse. So how was I going to tell that story? Well, I just started taking pictures and just taking pictures. And slowly, I actually was able to connect everything together. It's a moment in time that never happened. But you're still left with that one other problem I have with photography, which is that there's that famous phrase in English, a picture's 1,000 words. I think a picture's 1,000 questions. Because usually when I look at a picture, I always have all these questions like, what is that thing in the picture? Why is that person wearing that hat? What is that thing that's by their feet? So I thought, what if I could actually answer those questions that people always have when they look at pictures? And what if I could allow Will to explain to you this amazing thing that he's doing in his own words? What would that look like? So I asked him to explain what they were doing. He gave me an explanation of what aquaponics was and what vermiculture was. Explained to me what he was growing. I helped to describe what the action was happening, give everybody names, told you where you were, reminded you that there's actually a fish in this picture that you might get lost with all the craziness all around you. And then lastly, I asked Will to give a title to the picture, the key theme that he wanted to convey. Will Allen, who is an urban farmer who has started literally hundreds of these aquaponics projects in the United States, is nothing short of the leader of a movement. And it's something that he calls the good food revolution. Every image that we do in our project is constructed that way. We take somebody, they explain to us what they do, and then they give us the words to explain what their ideas are, what their solutions are, what their passions are. And then we wrap it in a story, and then it becomes an image. This is an image that's actually 12 feet across by about 6 feet. It's pretty close to the actual size, actually projected on this wall. And I continue to go around the country. Running Squirrel, explaining what sustainability is. Miguel, explaining what food justice is. And Peter Gayeton also giving his ideas of sustainability. Going around the entire country, finding those stories of people that are so amazing and so innovative. And what I ended up with was a lexicon of sustainability. Kind of a wonky term to use. We published a book this past year. My publisher, HarperCollins, right before we went to press, they said, we just did a focus group. We have 2 pieces of information for you. Really vital. First is, nobody knows what a lexicon is. Second thing is, nobody knows what sustainability is. So a lexicon is a collection of words, and hopefully I don't need to explain what sustainability is to people in this room. It's a collection of words that in this case could actually give you a window into understanding how a group of people can come up with solutions to something. And usually there's always a point, because you guys are so well-mannered and as we Americans are very Canadian, very polite, usually there's always somebody who says, it's just words at the end of the day. You made some art out of it, but ultimately it's just words. There's no power in that. But I would argue that there is. I believe very strongly in the power of words. I believe so strongly in the power of words that I can tell you that words can actually shift entire industries just by a consumer learning what a term is. So I actually have a film that explains that. It's a short film. And it explains exactly what the power of words are and how by learning a word you can actually shift entire industries. Can we cut the house? Lights? Okay.
This is the story of an egg. An egg comes from the supermarket, just like cans of corn, or loaves of bread, or a box of breakfast cereal. An egg is just something from a carton. You buy an egg, and you eat it. But then came the term cage-free. If somebody can sell a cage-free egg, how are chickens in cages living? Pretty badly, it turns out. Chickens cram together so closely they can't turn their bodies or touch the ground. With lives so stressful, many have their beaks cut to prevent them from pecking each other to death. To understand terms like cage-free, we need a lexicon of sustainability. So cage-free eggs are certainly better, but how much better? That's what I asked Alexis Cofer, a poultry farmer in Vacaville, California. And she said,
I remember the first time I heard the term cage-free, it was when I read it on a box in a grocery store. And I got kind of excited. I thought maybe these were free chickens running around, and took a little research to find out it didn't mean much, actually. The chickens were stored in big, huge houses and industrial factory farms, so I didn't think it was anything more than just good marketing.
A definition for cage-free is a very simple one, not raised in a cage. That's really all it means. It doesn't say anything about the environment they are in. It just says something about the environment they're now not in.
David Evans grazes chickens and cows on coastal farmlands an hour north of San Francisco.
Clearly, we would hope that the environment is better for the chicken outside of the cage. But of course, if it's standing, an inch in its own muck and still can't turn around, it begs the idea of where do we go from there?
The term free range was a term that I really loved. I really thought it meant something for quite a long time, and finally I realized that one had already been hijacked as well.
The problem with the term free range is that in one's mind, making sense of it, it's, freedom. This is a very American ideal. So when we apply that to a chicken, we're like, wow, this chicken is free to range. Well, it's free to range within a certain size space, which isn't very big. It's much smaller than a chicken would roam in its natural environment.
Imagine a warehouse filled with 5, 50, 500, 5,000 chickens. Now add a tiny door that leads to a small, confined outdoor space. Outside, inside. This is the misunderstood life of a free-range chicken.
Marketing confuses these words, and then people start to believe things that they don't really mean and get confused by all the different labels they see in the store. So it's really important to get back to sort of basic truisms.
People have this image in their head that free range means outdoors, and it's always in mild, perfect climate, sunny without it being too hot.
The Gleason family have worked their lands for 6 generations and are deeply skeptical of the way farming is marketed in this country.
So you can have free range, cage-free that's in a warehouse and everybody's still indoors. Or you can have them outdoors on grass. And I
Would it
think
be
that
possible to change your computer to mirror displays mode? Because I'm getting only one side of the display, and so I can't see the video in the feed.
Sure, I'd have to stop. You want me to stop and do that?
Yeah, it's probably better just to keep going with the presentation. Yeah, it'll work.
And pasture meaning grass, meaning buds, meaning sunshine. So I think it's a really good defined term for what small farmers are doing.
So we go cage-free, we go free-range, now we're going to pasture-raised. And soon we will go beyond that, to keep trying to define these terms for understanding and transparency so that customers can better support the type of food production models that they want to. And that comes with the information. So we have to continually define these terms.
We're small farmers in a new world where we don't just farm, but we're also educators, and we're also learning how to be marketers so that we can hold on to the authenticity of words and take it back from the big corporations.
And that's the story of an egg. To learn more about terms like cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised, visit us at lexiconofsustainability.com. And remember, your words can change the world.
There's other terms that effectively can change an industry. Another really interesting one is RBST, a hormone that's given to dairy cows that increases their production. A dairy farmer was so shocked when he saw what happened to those cows that he said, I'm not going to use that, but even more than that, I'm going to put on the side of my carton that I don't have RBST in my milk. What happened? He actually got sued, not for what was in his milk, but for what was not in his milk. Went to the Supreme Court, and of course he won the right to actually say what he didn't have in his own milk. It's interesting to note that the company that made RBST and that launched this lawsuit eventually had to sell off that part of their business. Why? Because consumers actually learned what a term meant and were given the opportunity as shoppers actually make a purchase based upon their values. That's why it's really, really important to understand these terms, because you as a consumer actually have the opportunity, the more you know, to have an impact on what we all eat. There's a lot of principles we talk about when we talk about food. We talk about eating local, and we talk about the people who eat local being locavores. We also talk about terroir, which is a French term that most people think about when they think about wine. This particular region has wine that tastes a certain way because of the climate or the soil or maybe the way that wine is produced. But it applies to everything. We now see it when people talk about their own food systems. They talk about what makes a certain place so special. And even people play with the term terroir. I made images of an oyster farmer in California who insisted that his oysters tasted so good because he had aguar, which was terroir minus terre. This is what a language looks like when it's being made all around you. Our project is interesting in the sense that I don't get to decide what goes on the images. These are actually these people's own words. I write them, it's in my handwriting, but it's actually their own words. And so as a result, sometimes you get the most unexpected explanations. Other things that people talk about when they talk about food, and they talk about food that's being more local, they talk about its distance it travels. And this is an image that might make less sense for you here because you don't use miles. But this idea that food has to come to you from somewhere. I always say that this term is not a very useful term because it's filled with so many contradictions, but it's also a really important term just to introduce people to the concepts of the fact that food does come from somewhere. And the more that you are aware that food has to travel from somewhere, you realize that if you get something from halfway around the world, when you can get something from just maybe a few miles or 50 miles away, you're making choices that can actually have an impact on your local community and your local food system. And those principles that people use when they talk about eating food locally are things like eating things that are in season, actually becoming more in sync with the times of the year and what's available in those years. It's really, really difficult in the industrialized world to actually eat in seasons because we don't think of tomatoes as meaning July and August. We think of tomatoes as meaning going to the supermarket and getting them in a shrink-wrap container. I lived in Italy for many years, and you would actually just look forward to the times of the year where certain foods were available, and then remember them, and then wait for them to come the next year. It's a really great antidote for the sameness that we have in an industrially based diet. After eating in season, this idea of being local then lends itself into actually knowing who grows your food and actually who that person is. I'm going to get into this more a little bit later, but this principle of knowing your food and knowing your farmer is really, really key to being in a food system. If there's any takeaway I could give you today to having a more deeper connection to your food is just try to buy one thing in the next week that actually came from someplace local. And if you're already doing that, try to buy one thing this week that actually came from somebody that you actually saw their face. The act of doing that might seem like it's very trivial, but it will set in motion a series of events that will actually change the way that you look at everything you buy. And you'll start to think about the fact that everything is made by someone. These relationships, this is Farmer Ann in Boulder, Colorado. Farmer John, if anybody's ever seen the documentary The Real Dirt about Farmer John, this is Farmer John in Caledonia, Illinois. They used to be the bedrocks of our communities. They were the people that provide us with food. The problem that these people have is that they are growing food based upon values that they can't let you as a consumer know because you don't understand all these principles that are deep to like what they're doing. For example, Farmer John, he grows using a principle called biodynamics. The problem that we have in our food system is a problem that is on two sides. We have a food system that's based upon price, when we used to have a food system that was based upon nutrition and quality. And lastly, a food system that's based upon values. How can people that grow our food convey to you all of those things if you as a consumer don't know even the most basic things about how food is made? And that's the challenge that we didn't face 50 years ago. We as consumers, actually, it's incumbent upon us to actually be informed because nobody is going to do it for us. Nobody is going to explain to us how our food is made so that we can become educated and informed and therefore support the things that are more in line with our values. I gave you two examples when we started about eggs and about milk. Those are just two basic things. But all around you, there are people that are trying to grow things with a greater respect for land, a greater respect for water. But as a consumer, if you don't understand what their principles are, then you can't support them. It's a tremendous problem that producers have, whether they're growing things using principles like biodynamics or permaculture, or they're using different ways to treat their soil like biochar, or if they are rotating their animals, as this man, Joel Salatin, explains as a grass farmer, or rotating their cattle and their poultry through pasture. These are all principles that get to the heart of what makes a value-based farming system, but yet as consumers we can't really support it if we don't know what it is. I think the best analogy to explain that is this picture right here. This is a man who was a farmer in Washington State, and 10 years after he bought his farm, the entire farm was flooded. He lost everything. His barn was under 4 feet of water. And he went back and he looked at the old pictures of his farm back from the 1940s, and that river there behind him was all lined with trees. And they told him there was something called a riparian buffer that kept the soil there when the water rose up and actually prevented the flooding. But when they introduced industrial farming into this region, they cut down everything all the way up to the river's edge to get as much land as possible to grow on. So what this guy did was, he actually replanted that entire area to actually preserve that environment, not just for him as a farmer, but for his child, because he looks at his responsibility as a 50-year responsibility, so that this farm will be there for his child 50 years from now. These are principles that farmers all across the country are rediscovering, but again, have no way to convey to consumers. There are people who don't actually raise their pigs in windowless warehouses, but actually return to the way pigs were raised previously. There are people that actually don't use pesticides to kill pests on farms, but actually do what nature does by actually injecting beetles in what's called a beetle bank all through between rows of crops, and those beetles actually go out and eat pests in the field at night. All kinds of things that people are doing to return to how farming had once been before we had a reliance on petrochemical-based agriculture, industrial agriculture, and what seems innovative today, but actually what had been practiced all the way up until the 1930s and 1940s. We also see communities that actually share seeds, that actually get together and have seed swaps. I'm always amazed because I live in an area in California where you cannot grow a tomato. I live too close to the coast. It never gets warm enough. But you go to a seed catalog and you can buy tomato seeds, and they just assume that it's going to be for any place in North America it's going to grow. But that's actually not the way it used to be. It used to be that you would save your seeds after every year, and those seeds would adapt to a certain place, and you would get seeds from a place because it was made for that climate. As these seed swaps now reappear, which they used to be a tradition every February across North America, as they appear, people are now saving. These are all seeds that people have saved, that they've grown out, that are adapted to where they live, and actually they give away for free to everyone else. This idea of actually sharing seeds builds community, but also builds bioregional food security. Actually, these are all seeds that are from a certain bioregion. These are becoming so commonplace now in North America that even public libraries are actually putting in seed libraries where you can actually check out seeds. Now, how can you check out a seed when you're going to put it in the ground? Well, you use your library card, you check out your seeds, and then you have to bring back seeds at the end of the year to put back into the library. And public libraries across the country are actually getting people using their library cards to check out seeds. We also have people saving seeds. These are in North Carolina, people that have gone around the United States for 40 years collecting apples. It's the largest repository of apples in North America, with over, I think, 1,200 varieties collected over the last 30 to 40 years. Why such fervent activity happening everywhere at the same time? Because it's really, really simple. It is a battle. I think somebody's trying to chat me. So, I don't think we want to talk to my daughter on her day off from school. So, why so much activity? Why so much fervent innovation? Why so much going back into the past to find what we've lost? Because across North America, we're seeing that it's a battle of biodiversity against monoculture. I remember I asked a woman named Vandana Shiva about her struggles in India, where they used to have 4,000 strains of rice that have been reduced now to less than 100. I remember stories talking to my grandmother from Italy about the 9 different zucchini that she planted every summer in her garden. And I asked her why so many different zucchini. And she looked at me like I was an idiot. And she said, there's so many more that I miss. Yet if you go to your supermarket today, there's one type. We've reduced everything to a commodity product. We no longer know how to buy things based upon taste or based upon nutrition. We only buy things based upon appearance and, of course, on price. And that's because we live in a monoculture. We're not buying food that's for us. We're buying food that's easy to produce. We're buying food that it's easier for an industrial system to give us. Because we've even forgot even to know how to ask for the food that would be more nutritious for us, that would have better taste. So how did we get there? Well, I can tell you how it happened in the United States. In the Second World War, we fought both in the Pacific and Europe at the same time. And the way that we did that was by perfecting the principle of economies of scale. We could amass a large group of people together, a large amount of resources together, and focus on building one thing and do it as effectively and as timely as possible. And it worked. We did the impossible. We fought 2 wars at one time, and we actually won both of them. And it was a tremendous economic period for the United States. Where did all that energy go? Both in the US and in Canada. It went to centralizing every other industry. It went to applying economies of scale to everything that touched our lives, whether it was the clothing that you're wearing or every aspect of our food system. It became cheaper to buy bread that came from Alberta than to buy bread from your local baker, because that guy in Alberta was making lots and lots of bread, and he could get it here cheaper. And because we as consumers in the post-war era, we're shifting, we're becoming less inclined to stay at home. We all, men and women, both enter the workforce. The entire food system changed in terms of our buying habits. We no longer bought based upon quality, we bought based upon price. Before the Second World War, people spent over 30% of their money on food. By the time we had successfully centralized every aspect of our food system, it was down to about 10%. And we forgot what food tasted like, and we forgot what all of those elements that made up a local food system were. They just disappeared. And now we recognize what the problem is with that. It's this principle that people now talk about when they talk about food. They talk about how do you take the principle of economies of scale and turn it around so we can have a more local, accountable food system. It's the principle of economies of community. So what is economies of community? Economies of community looks at all of the players in a food system. It shows how to connect consumers to producers. It takes those same principles, those same efficiencies, those same masteries of distribution and turns it on its end. How can communities actually practice all these principles of creating a system that it does not depend upon something centrally organized and centrally distributed that comes from 1,000 miles away? Or even why? Like, why would that be important? Why isn't it enough just to have food based upon price? Well, the problem with that is that you can't really talk about culture unless you're also talking about food. They're really part of the same equation. And I think the best example I can give you of how food really does drive culture is what happened down in Alabama, in Greensboro. A bunch of architects and urban planners got together because they heard about a town called Greensboro, Alabama, that had died. Not one shop on Main Street. Everything was boarded up. How did that happen? They all had their theories, and somebody said, we should just go down there. So they went down to Greensboro, looking around. Lo and behold, it's completely abandoned. An old guy's walking down the street, and they say, sir, what happened to your Main Street? And he said, I don't know. But I do know that you used to be able to go across the street and get a slice of pie and a cup of coffee. And that's how you did all your business. That's how we all did our business back in those days, right in that place across the street there. So what'd they do? They opened up a pie shop as an experiment in this town. And within 12 months, shops began returning to the main street. You had people moving from urban areas to build bicycles out of bamboo. You had local kids building businesses from pecans that are locally produced. And slowly the town came back to life, all because of coffee and a slice of pie, but also because people rediscovered the identity of the place, an identity that was tied to food. What people call, in some ways, food sovereignty, this idea that it really is important to have local food. It's important to have that sense of connection to food because it identifies you. So how does that work for consumers? How do consumers become more involved in a local food system? Well, one way is to actually join a CSA. So how many people in this room know what a CSA is? Okay. So a CSA is you actually say to a farmer, I'm going to give you this much money at the beginning of the year, and every week he's going to give you a box of food. And it's like you're an investor in the farm. Because of all the money that everybody gave him, all the families gave him at the beginning of the year, that farmer, or in this case, this woman, Anne, she was able to give them a box of food every week. You share in the growth and the risk and the benefit of the farm. You're an investor in the farm. And that's called a CSA box, which is called Community-Supported Agriculture. And she had a drop-off spot in the town of Boulder where you would go to pick up your box every day, would have your name every week, every Wednesday. And everybody hated the idea. Why? Because it wasn't enough that they actually bought a box every week. They actually wanted to go to the farm. So she now just sets up all of her food just there at the farm, and you fill your box there. Because she realized a very fundamental fact that as consumers, people were so disconnected from where their food came from that any opportunity they had to actually go to where food was made would draw them together. And that Wednesday that I was there were hundreds of people there. There were kids running around, climbing on tractors and chasing chickens. And she really has played a really vital role in her community and brought the community back to life. It's not just, though, about agriculture, about produce. There's people that are creating this idea of a CSA about everything. This is one about beans and grains, where they've discovered all the grains and beans they used to grow in Oregon and Washington, and they're now replanting them. You actually can't buy a CSA share here because they're sold out 2 years in advance. Such is the demand that people have now for food that actually comes from a place and food that has a face. There's even one for fisheries. If you're wondering why Kristen at the right has that very unhappy expression on her face, it's because this is called Mission Pie. There's a pie shop in San Francisco, and when she agreed to have this woman with her fish have it be a pickup spot for her CSA every week, she didn't realize that there's going to be the smelly fish every week in her pie shop. But that was her commitment that she was making. And people come from different parts of San Francisco to every Saturday pick up their fish that's come right off of a boat that they're getting directly from a fisherman. People even get goat shares, where people actually get raw goat milk, which is illegal. So the way that they get around that is they actually buy the goat, theoretically. And this man milks your goat for you, and then he puts it into a mason jar, and you come and pick it up every week from his refrigerator. People who are trying to get things local, are trying to create different forms of distribution, are trying to have direct relationships with the people who produce their food. But that could be a series of folkloric stories. They're not really going to shift the needle. They're not really going to change a food system. So how would it look if it got bigger? It looked like this. What Julie did was, she said to all these producers, you guys are great at growing stuff, but you're not great at selling stuff. You're not great at marketing stuff. So I'm going to do that for you. Everything you grow, I'm going to put in a warehouse. Then I'm going to sell to people. And then I'm going to get you extra money because I'm going to put a plant in here. I'm going to make all this extra stuff. I'll make peanut butter. I'll make all different kinds of things with everything that you give me, and I'll add value to it. And I will become a hub for all the growers in my community, and then I will find a way to find a market for everything you grow. Of all the images we make, this is one of the most popular ones that people use, that people reprint, because everyone would like to know how you can actually be a hub for all these people that are growing food in an area so it can find a market. When things get bigger, you talk about cooperative distribution. These are a bunch of guys that had farms with big trucks, all going to the same places every week, passing each other's trucks, and they finally said, this is crazy. Let's all get together. We're all organic producers. Let's pool everything, let's pool all of our resources, and we'll all share our trucks. So now you're seeing a bunch of small farms that could never compete with a big industrial company in the industrial agriculture space, but now they can, because combined, these 50 small farms are the size of an industrial farm, and that's how they've accomplished that, by making packs, which they call cooperative distribution. But you know, the distribution challenges that we've talked about, that these people are overcoming, are still not just the final part of that, because there are places that just food does not get to. An example is a food desert. How many people here know what a food desert is? A food desert is another term like food miles. It's ultimately inaccurate, but let's just say it's a gateway term. It's a term that introduces you to an idea. A food desert is people that don't have access to food. So this is a housing project in Chicago. The closest food is 6 miles away. How do we know that? Because they actually drew us a map that showed us where Altgeld was. Now what's amazing about this, when I went to make this picture of a food desert in this public housing project that was 6 miles from food, the security police stopped me and they said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm making a picture of a food desert." And they said, "This is not a food desert. We've got food right in that building." And they took me inside this windowless building that you see here. And that was their supermarket. Let me tell you what they sell if you can't read it. They sell dishwasher soap, crayons, light bulbs, dog food, lighter fluid, detergent, beauty products, shoe polish, toilet paper, diapers, candy, cookies, soda, chips, lottery tickets, and alcohol. That's considered a food store for 6,000 people. The solution? Well, there's local liquor stores that people across the country are realizing are amazing places to turn into distribution hubs for more healthy food. And so you're seeing that they're starting to install these alternatives. And there's all kinds of public funding and foundation funding that is now going towards shifting the needle by changing people's food choices. Why would you do that? Because we're talking about equal food access for all. But also, if you're very far thinking, you realize that in low-income communities, you have the highest incident of diabetes, of obesity, hypertension, all caused by poor diets. So actually, if you're really thinking selfishly, you'd want to have the lowest health costs you could as a society. So you'd want to probably focus on the places where people eat worst and probably change their food outcomes by getting them access to better, healthier food options. And we're seeing this, the idea of the new corner store around the country. But people are so disconnected even from the right food choice that it's even a harder problem to overcome. And the example that I always give is this one. In Los Angeles, you guys have mapped their local food system. And they've showed you where all the food exists in public places that you might never have known. So you can actually follow that map right there and actually pick oranges off of a street in Los Angeles. When I was doing these pictures with these guys one day, they're called the Fallen Fruit Collective, I was eating bananas on the highway Meridian, and a woman stopped and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just eating bananas." And she said, "From that tree?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I walked past that tree for 20 years. I didn't know you could eat bananas from the tree." It's because we're so disconnected from where food comes from that even when we see it, we don't actually realize that what we're seeing is actually food. The reason why we have the situation that we have right now in the world is that when you make an industrial food system and you centralize everything, all those things that were a local food system get totally dismantled, get taken apart. So even if you want to eat locally, sometimes you can't. I'll give you a few examples. Wheat. There was a map I saw of all of the eastern seaboard mills for milling wheat 100 years ago. There were hundreds and hundreds of them. In 2012, there was only one in the entire state of North Carolina. That mill was actually an Austrian wooden mill that this guy installed in his bakery. And what he did was he actually went to local bakers and said, "We used to be known for growing wheat. Let's start growing wheat again. And I will buy everything you grow, and I'll mill it myself in that little mill." This idea of actually reintroducing wheat is hard because we don't have the ways even to process food locally on a small scale. They just don't exist. And the best example I can give you is the combine that you actually use to actually harvest wheat. We only have industrial combines. The last combine that was made that's small enough for a small wheat field was made almost 30 or 40 years ago. This actually is a combine that comes from Germany. And so we just don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the actual things that actually exist for us to actually have a local food system because we've centralized everything and everything was put into disrepair or like disuse or closed down. So you're seeing not only just in terms of wheat, but also in terms of slaughterhouses. Slaughterhouses all over the country that are now slowly reopening. That local producers are getting together to reintroduce slaughterhouses. And even when they can't introduce slaughterhouses, they're actually This is on Lopez Island. They're actually building slaughterhouses inside of trucks and actually having USDA inspectors go with trucks farm to farm. This used to be a cattle growing area like Lopez Island. It all died because they actually had to put the cattle on ferries after their slaughterhouse closed down. With the introduction of things like this, you're seeing all kinds of mechanisms. This is the second most trafficked of all of our images. All kinds of mechanisms are being reintroduced to bring people back into local food systems. It's a big uphill battle. But that's why when you see things that are produced locally, you just have to understand how hard it was in many cases for that actually to get not only grown or made, but actually processed to reach you, because the infrastructure, it just doesn't exist. When I talk about the power of values, I'm talking about how to arm you as a consumer. What are the ideas? What are the principles that you need to know? There's organics. There's even beyond organics. This is actually on Salt Spring, Michael Abelman, who some of you might know locally. This idea of eating locally or eating food that's certified or not having any organic certification, but as they say in the South, face certification. And of course, there's a discussion of GMOs, of whether you should actually, as a consumer, want GMOs in your food or not. I don't want to put too fine of a point on GMOs, but I will say that our project is very, really simple. Our project is about information. So when Whole Foods in the United States says that by 2018, all products will have listed on them whether there's GMOs or not in the food, we applaud that, because what we're saying is you're creating a more transparent food system. You're giving consumers access to information that they wouldn't otherwise have, and you're allowing them to shop according to their values. There's terms like grass-fed and corn-fed, the difference between the two. I won't go into much detail here, but suffice to say, cattle are not meant to eat corn. It's not part of their natural digestive processes. Their stomachs aren't made to break corn down. But more important, actually, than this is two items I want to get to really, really quickly. When people ask me about terms in 2015, two principles. One is the fact that we actually have antibiotics in our meat. How did that happen? Well, almost 80% of all the antibiotics that's produced in North America actually doesn't go to people. It actually goes to animals. And what's even crazier than that is it's given to animals that aren't even sick. And why is it given to animals that aren't sick? Well, it turns out that if you give, for example, cattle antibiotics, they gain weight faster. And since cattle are sold on weight, it's probably a pretty good idea, if you're only thinking about an economy based upon price, to give cattle antibiotics. The problem is, where do those antibiotics go? Well, they go into our water system. They go into the food that we're eating. And so you're going to see in 2015 packaging that's going to start saying there's no antibiotics. And we're going to have the same arguments that we had in court as we had with RBST and GMOs. Traceability is something that's really big for Canada, certainly in like Vancouver. It's actually knowing where your fish came from. How many people in this audience have had red snapper before? So there's a 75% chance that you didn't have red snapper. It's the most mislabeled fish that exists, and it's because it's wild. And you have the same expectation to have it on a menu or at the supermarket as you would to find a can of corn or pasta. And so people have to mislabel things to meet that demand. And they do that because there actually is no traceability in our fisheries industry. You actually don't have an accurate sense of where something was caught, how long ago it's been out of the water, how long it took to reach you. This is a voluntary effort by a group called NORPAC in Seattle that actually has put taggers on all their boats in the Pacific. And as fish come out of the water, they're actually tagged, and that tag stays with the fish all the way until it reaches the store. I was just this morning filming at Albion, which is a local fish producer here in Vancouver, and they're also introducing traceability as well. As consumers, you will be able to, 2 years from now, when you go to the supermarket, actually know when you buy fish, where it came from. Why is that important? Because you can actually start to prevent overfishing if we as globally understand who's catching fish where and what it is. People are also talking about the principle of identity preserved, this idea that food comes from some place and consumers want to know. You're now seeing this in all kinds of packaging. It says this particular grain was grown in this particular place by this particular person and milled this particular way. The fact that the identity of something actually does matter. In a transparent food society, all of these things will become commonplace. And that adds to something, and it contributes to something which is called food security. We are more food secure if we know what we're eating and who's making it and what's in it. I will skip over food waste, and I'll just really kind of end by just talking about who are the people that make a food system. What does a food system look like? What does a food system look like in your own community? Amazingly, in many cases, it's just people just like you. This is an amazing group in San Francisco called La Cocina that takes immigrant women who know that food equals culture and says, you have all this cultural knowledge, you could actually turn that into a business for yourself. So it takes the foods that they know how to make, they give them business courses, they design their logo, they make their business cards, they help them go out into the marketplace, and then they become food companies in San Francisco. Kitchen incubators are now appearing all over North America, and they are jump-starting local economies by putting people to work who actually know food and see food as being a very specific and indefinable part of culture. The average age of a farmer in North America actually is not 57, it's actually 58. But this is Stone Barns in upstate New York that actually trains young farmers. Because where is the next generation of farmers going to come from? How are we going to convince them to go into something that is so economically dangerous? So there's actually this movement to actually introduce young farmers, and these farmers are called greenhorns. But it also starts much younger. It starts with getting into the classroom and getting kids closer to food. This is Alice Waters with the Edible Schoolyard Project that actually goes into classrooms, gets kids to not only grow food, but then also cook food, and then take food home and introduce it, in many cases, to their parents for the first time. It's going into urban areas and teaching people horticultural literacy. It's taking farmers who worked in industrial farming, in this case in California, and saying to them, if you want to become an organic farmer, as this place does, they give them land, they give them the tools, they get them organically certified, they get them into a farmer's market, and then 3 years later they kick them out and make them go on their own. They've literally brought online almost 1,000 organic farmers in the past 10 years in California. This is a farm incubator, and they're all over North America. This is how you introduce a new workforce of people that grow food based upon values. This is actually how it works. It's literally one person, one teacher at a time. It also takes principles like land trusts and conservation easements, which are mechanisms that allow farmers to stay on their land and giving them money to continue farming so that farmland doesn't get turned into housing projects or doesn't get turned into weekend getaways for rich city folk. I want to end by talking a little bit about our project, how it works, how we do what we do. Our project is based upon the power of portability. So you've seen some images. We also have a series with PBS, which you can go to our website or you can go to PBS to see. We make dozens of films that explain all these principles. We also make collections of our images. So every few months we make 24 images which we box up, and anybody can go to our website, anybody here in this audience, for example, can say, I want to have a show, and we'll just send you a show to keep for free. So we've had almost 750 shows in the past 2 years, hosted and curated by people that we've never met. So this is South Central Los Angeles. This is Central Park in New York, where people just began putting notes down next to each image. This is at a food sustainability summit. In the upper left is a picture of a boy at a street fair that they had for the Lexicon in Amarillo, Texas, who was so inspired that he made his own images that he wanted to have. He wanted to be pictured in front of our images, images that were inspired by the project. You can also go to our website and you can download wheat pastes. You can have painting parties. You can get them with words or without. You can add your own words, and then you can put them up anywhere. I think we even have a video that explains how to make wheat paste as well. And then lastly, we have a book. We have a social network called Lexicon of Food that launches next month. And then I wanted to leave you, because I see students here, with the story of Project Localize. We actually teach people how to make these images. And we have schools all over the country doing it. So how did it start? It started because a bunch of kids in Ames, Iowa said to me, we want to have some pictures. Can you come to Iowa and do pictures? And I said, I'm not going to Iowa. I'm trying to get this book done. I'm not going to Iowa. So a week later, I was in Iowa, because my wife does run the project and she does call the shots. I took 75 kids around Iowa, and I showed them what sustainable agriculture looked like. I showed them, explained to them what a local food system is, who were the people in their local food system, what their sustainable practices were, and then how to turn it into an information artwork. And I didn't really know what to expect, obviously, until I saw the first images. This by a 16-year-old explaining what aquaponics is. So that's dozens of photographs collaged together by a young woman who had never even used a camera before. And it's part art, it's part journalism. This is her working with this man to explain his story. We were so moved by what we saw that we actually rented the metro station underneath the USDA in Washington, D.C. So the T-Mobile ads came down, and the kids' artwork went up. And employees of the USDA had to walk past it every single day on the way to work, which resulted in the kids being brought to Washington, D.C., being asked to speak on Capitol Hill, meet with local Congress people, and actually explain what they had learned in the project. We now do this project in English and in Spanish. We have teams in Oaxaca, Guadalajara, Sierra Gorda. We have teams across the United States, as far as Hawaii, Alaska, all across the US. We'd love to start doing them in Canada. We have an entire curriculum that's all available online, and it's all for free. Whenever I photograph somebody, before I end my time with them, I ask them, what was the one moment that happened? What was the one thing that happened in your life that shifted what you did? And I didn't do that in the beginning. I did it after I met Bill Hodge in Georgia, because Bill told me that he was a cattleman and working in industrial agriculture, teaching industrial cattlemen the tricks of the trade. And one night driving home, he realized that what he was teaching these people was not what he had been taught himself when he was a younger man. And there's a passage in the Bible, it's called the Road to Damascus moment, when Saul is on his way to Damascus to slay Christians, and he has this epiphany, this awakening, and he discovers his true life's calling. Bill's true life calling, he realized, was actually not to support a system that was not actually what his parents had taught him. And he completely changed his life. And so it's a question that I always ask people wherever I go, and it's always amazing the range of answers that I get. So I guess I'd just like to end with that with you. What will be the one moment that you have that will change the way you look at food? Thank you.
That was great, and I can't wait to get your materials up here and start up the programs. Questions for Douglas? We have a microphone in back, so we can get it all recorded. What was your road to Damascus?
What was my road to Damascus? Well, let me just take out my book. My road to Damascus moment was I was raised in Marin County, which is just north of San Francisco. And I moved away. I was one of those people who thought I was never going to move back to where I was raised. And I was actually living in Italy. And my wife wanted to make goat milk ice cream. And she wanted to do it in the United States. And there's two places that she wanted to do it, either upstate New York or in Northern California. And I wasn't going to go to upstate New York because I don't like the cold. So I went back to Northern California, ironically 10 miles away from where I was born. To this day, don't know how I agreed to do that. When my daughter was born, I wanted to, show her all things that I had done when I was a child. And one of those was I would always go see the salmon spawning in this place called Devil's Gulch. And when I took my daughter there and we trudged up the muddy path and got all the way there, I was expecting to see my memory revisited on my child, which was salmon bounding over each other to go up to spawn. Well, there wasn't one salmon there. And it started me on a journey to understand what had led salmon to no longer return to the place of my childhood. And that, to me, was really the first switch that made me realize that we all have memories that are going to disappear all around us if we don't take a more direct action in reversing the increasing industrialization of every aspect of our lives. Well, I have an email address here, and those are all the different ways that you guys can we answer all of the email that we get, and you can find us on all of these different social media apparati. And thanks a lot for having me here. Oh, yes?
How do you get started on this project? How did from that sort of road to Damascus moment manifest into this wonderful project?
Well, when we started our food business, it was a business we made that was totally a labor of love, a business based upon these values that we had, that we would not compromise on, or more specifically, my wife would not compromise on. And I was that person staring at the ceiling at 2 o'clock in the morning, about to lose a house because of a business that was based upon values and trying to convey those to consumers very ineffectively. And it had a happy ending in our case. We actually came out the other side. We just sold the business a year ago. But that journey of trying to create a business based upon values and seeing many people all around me that also had food-based businesses, the challenges that they faced in conveying what they were doing to consumers who had no idea was a very powerful one. And I've been making films for 30 years. So it would be pretty poor if I had these skill sets that I never used for something. And we don't ever talk about Monsanto in our project because we don't have to. Our project is about solutions, and so Monsantos are really irrelevant. And I love the fact that we can take what we're doing into places Monsanto can never go. I think that's what the food movement needs. It needs super passionate, focused people who are able to meet head-on with consumers at places that Monsanto cannot buy themselves into. And I had a big road to Damascus moment, as it were, as a filmmaker when I was working with PBS, and I went past a hallway and somebody was in a room talking about something in South Dakota, community outreach. And I said, what does that mean, community outreach? And the person said, well, they made this film about South Dakota, and now they're planning all these events in South Dakota when they released this documentary on PBS to support the community. And I said, I thought you just make a film. And the person from PBS said, making the film is the easy part. Using the film and getting it out into the world and shifting people's thinking, that's the hard part. So we have a whole staff of volunteers all over the US. We consider the making of the images or the making of our films the easy part. The hard part is finding ways to get it out into the world that a Monsanto can never follow. Ways to get into the world that illuminate things that are totally opaque. And so that is for us the passion. We are all about distribution. We're all about portability of ideas. And so that was a big shift for me, realizing that I had these skill sets and I had this knowledge, and it'd be a shame if I didn't do something with those two things.
Are there any other questions? Well, thank you so much.
Sure.